Well, welcome everybody. My name is Dan Mazurkiewicz. We also have Liz Wheeler here. Feel free to refer to us as Maz and Wheels to make it a little bit easier on yourselves. But this is going to be our first installment. We've got some hot takes for you today. Just going to kind of jump into some emerging technology, things that we're interested in. And we've got a great guest today in Jonathan Braun. Going to pick his brain on all things digital signage, but in particular, we've got one, very specific topic we want to cover, and that's DirectView LED. We've talked about it for years. Jonathan, you and I go back quite a ways and had many different conversations, but we've got some exciting stuff to talk about today. So I will pass it along to Liz. What do you want to talk about, Liz?
Thanks, Dan. Well, I'm super excited to be here as well. And Jonathan, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Dan said, let's talk about DirectView LED, right? It's been the topic of conversation for years now. It's always been that hard conversation, right? It hasn't been the easiest thing to jump into. And we're seeing and hearing a lot more about how do we get into DirectView LED easier. And I think there's some really cool things happening in our industry that's making that a possibility. What do you think about that? Is DirectView LED getting a little bit easier than it was to get entry into?
Absolutely. That's a really important point. DirectView LED has been like this incredibly hot new display technology after so many years of, well, I don't want to say boring because some of my display vendor friends will get a little upset with me for doing that, but shall we say what we're used to, the standard black rectangle. And so DirectView LED started opening up. I always say Legos for AV nerds. I am one, so I can do that. But it was that really beautiful, smaller building block with bigger, bolder, brighter images. And we played with this for years with projectors and with LCD video walls, but there was always trade-offs. Projectors are more complex. You have to have a screen. There was always ambient light issues. Video walls, you always had bezels. DVLED, you don't. The DirectView LED product gives you that bolder, brighter, wider viewing angle, just a really beautiful image. But the complexity came in all the little tiny building blocks, where you're having to stack them all together. You got to worry about how you mount them. You got to worry about how you cable them. And ultimately, what truly needs to happen for our industry to take those much more mainstream and make all of our jobs collectively a lot easier, mine included, is kind of get close to LCD. We have to get very close to that LCD or LFD, as we've been kind of using, large format display. For anybody who doesn't know the jargon, I need subtitles sometimes when I do this stuff. But it's trying to get to that simplicity where I can build a DirectView LED wall and it's not too much more difficult than the flat panel there you can see over my shoulder. And that's kind of where we're headed, from a lot of different vendors introducing a lot of what they're calling all-in-one products at varying levels of complexity of actual physical install. That's one big differentiator between different offerings, but moving into where it's simple, ordering it based on a size without having to worry about the same kind of concerns about, well, what pixel pitch do I use? And well, what cabinets do I use? And well, can I get a frame kit for it to make it look like a flat panel? And how do I mount it? So we're seeing a lot of this introduction from a number of vendors, making it much more straightforward to deploy.
Right off the bat, less daunting to a lot of people too, I think.
Exactly. It's more approachable. That's what we need. If you look at what, like, the system on chip thing that happened in digital signage, kind of going back almost 10 years when Samsung introduced their first system on chip enabled display, and now everybody's got one, it made it much more approachable, not just for us as the channel, but for our end user customers, where I don't have to think about all these different boxes and cables and connectors. It's pull flat panel out of box, put on wall, put power on. They don't have that wireless power thing yet. I hear somebody's working on it, and we're good to go. And that's kind of where we need to get to for DirectView LED to become truly mainstream. And you're even starting to see it creep into the consumer industry, where there are micro LED TVs starting to come onto the market that are going to be sold at retail. And if we've got to get to that point, it's got to kind of be idiot proof. And then at that kind of, well, technology level, we can start putting them in all kinds of places where we would have used a projector, or we would have used maybe an 85-inch flat panel instead of a video wall, or instead of a traditional DVLED. And that opens up a lot of new opportunity.
It definitely does. I think, and you mentioned a little bit about the install process, right? Like, when in the past, when we're doing large custom spec and design for direct view LEDs, and you're looking at that full bill of materials, and there's all the different pieces and parts to it, right?
Yeah.
There's boxes here and boxes there, and how do we get this all together? And we got to bring these guys in who are super educated on how to install direct view LED.
Right.
How do you see some of the trends, especially around Samsung, moving towards to be able to help with that difficulty as well?
Yeah, that's a good one to point out because they've been one of the most recent in a line of vendors offering an all-in-one solution. Their approach is a little different, so it does deserve highlighting. Where kind of the first step was, well, we'll throw out a bundle. Where now, hey, at the distribution level, working with you guys, the vendors could say, hey, we're going to have one SKU that represents the 30 or 40 parts that have to go into that complex bill of materials that are, frankly, a pain in everybody's backside. Well, that's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't really simplify things. It just simplifies the ordering process, which not to scoff at. I know that makes your lives easier, but for an installer, that's a little more complicated because it's still the same. You've got to put up the complex wall mounts and tons of cabinets and lots of alignment issues. And so then the next step was, well, the all-in-one product that are being sold that come as more of a kit and that have the frames and everything, but that are really still built from smaller pieces and that still take almost as long to install, even though everything's in one box. Where Samsung's going with the new IAB series, the wall all-in-one, or as I'll jokingly call it, the wall-in-one. I love that name. But the thing that they're doing with that is they've built it into 3 or 4 modules. So now instead of having to install lots of little pieces, you can put up your wall mount and lock just very simple self-aligning magnetic modules into a frame. And it becomes a much simpler process. And that's where we need to get to, because now you don't need specialized installation help. It's easier to learn to do. I've installed one myself, and it's been a little while since I've done field work. I'm not that kind of consultant, but I do get out there every once in a while. That's why I still own some faded jeans and a couple of torn T-shirts that usually Iron Maiden. Got to be a roadie there. But you can get out there, and I do still install stuff sometimes. I've helped install an IAB. It's doable for a normal civilian person. And then you look at your average AV integrator, who really is our core of our industry. That's going to be a lot easier for them to do at all levels. And you don't just need to be one of the big guys with super huge engineering teams. Much simpler to install. It takes a lot less time too, which is really important. When it's less than 2 hours to install a 146-inch panel, that's much more appropriate and approachable for anybody. And that's better for our end users too. You don't need a conference room down for days while somebody's trying to put a new display up on the wall to retrofit from a projector.
Right.
Yeah, 2-hour install is exciting stuff. So I think that's one thing that's really piquing everyone's interest. So I know we could go on about this at length and forever. And I know we will continue to do that a little bit more, but I'm sure we'll talk about the IAB. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other technologies we've got coming up. But thank you, Jonathan, for your time today.
My pleasure.
This has been awesome, and definitely make sure that everybody kind of sticks around and watches for what we have next, because we've definitely got more coming. So
excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.